Sure. I think we'll give it one more minute, if that's right.
Sure.
Thank you. Great. So Roberta, if you don't mind, we can get started. Good evening, everyone. This is the April 24th meeting of the Community Preservation Committee. Pursuant to Chapter 2 of Acts of 2023, this meeting of the Somerville Community Preservation Committee will be conducted via remote participation. We have a video recording available upon request as soon as possible after the meeting. Roberta, would you mind calling the roll, please?
Sure. Reading in order of the agenda, Jahan,
Here.
Ryan.
Present.
I do not yet see Laura. John,
Here.
Joe,
Here.
Heather,
Here.
Eric,
I'm here.
David,
Here.
and we are expecting Rose to be absent this evening.
Great. Thank you so much, Roberta. So I was hoping to start the meeting with the approval of the meeting minutes. Just wanted to check my fellow committee members to see if they've had the chance to review the meeting minutes and whether anyone has any edits or adjustments. If no one has any edits or adjustments at this time, would somebody like to make a motion to approve the meeting minutes?
I'll move that we approve the minutes.
Thank you, Eric. Thank you, John. Roberta, would you mind calling roll, please?
Sure. Jahan,
Yes.
Ryan.
Roberta, am I able to vote given that I was not present at the last meeting?
Yes, you can vote that you received the meeting minutes.
Yes, to that.
We still do not have Laura. John,
Yes.
Joe,
Yes.
Heather,
Yes.
Eric,
Yes.
David,
Yes.
and that is all of you present. The
Great.
motion passes.
Thank you so much, Roberta. So I think we could move on to the second item, second bulleted item on the agenda, which is annual review process for FY25 funding round. Roberta, what are your thoughts about going down the list, starting with review project updates?
That sounds good. I will just talk you through everything. I don't think that this will be a very long conversation, depending on where you want to stop me for more information. But the first item on the list is to review the project updates. So since the last meeting, I've received updates from all of the grantees who have projects that are currently ongoing that the CPA has funded. So for your information, I've included all of those project reports in your meeting packet so you can see for yourselves what the status update is on all of those projects. And this is really helpful because we can look at this and see how are these projects moving along? Is there anything that is going to need our support to be able to take next steps? So I had hoped to have a single page summary for you of this list of projects before this meeting, and unfortunately, I have not been able to prepare as much as I would like to have prepared. So I'm just going to read through them and give not read through all of the reports, but read the names of all the reports and give a one sentence update. And I'm happy to stop and open any of the reports to discuss them as we go along. So in the order in which they're shown in the meeting packet, 217 Somerville Ave is in progress right now. They're working toward completing the design so that they can develop a cost estimate and obtain additional funding that's needed to complete the construction and put it out to bid. Correct me if I have missed anything, John.
That
Great.
is correct.
Brown School, I believe that is completed with the exception of some minor punch list items that we're waiting for the spring to be able to complete. The Broadway House, that was a project, historic preservation of an affordable housing site in East Somerville that was funded in 21. And that project has finally finished completely. They've submitted their final invoice, and we are, and so we can mark that project as completed successfully. Just taking a note. The next project on the list is Just to Start, and they're in the opposite end of their project. They are still working on completing the contract so that they can get their project under contract. We don't anticipate that it's going to get started right away anyway, because it takes some time for affordable housing projects to be able to get all of their funding and permits in order so that they can move forward. The 35 Richardson project was a blended project where the Somerville Community Corporation acquired a house that they were going to redevelop into 2 affordable housing units and set aside a portion of the lot as new open space. So the CPC had given funding of $210,000 for acquisition of the open space portion of the lot. Due to circumstances outside of their control, this project has not been able to move forward successfully, and they finally submitted a letter requesting to cancel this grant. So that $210,000 will be going back into our open space reserve this year.
Roberta, just briefly on that. So what does that do to the status of the open space component of it? Is that just gone as well?
Yes, there won't be, I think that they have finally divested of that entire property.
Was that the project or a project that CPC had come to the Conservation Commission to kind of take on some sort of stewardship of the property?
They might have,
Okay.
so
So we may have
that
to kind of
open-
close the loop on that. Yeah,
right, so that open space was never created.
okay.
It
It was a part of a publicly owned private space kind of endeavor where it was a development, affordable housing development project that was going to carve off a little area. It would be public, which was kind of no more than like a public amenity strip along the perimeter of the site.
Okay, and I may be thinking of another project. I just remember one where a couple of years ago where someone came to Conservation Commission looking to see whether we could somehow assume stewardship of a parcel of land in that sort of circumstance. And I think we agreed to it, but I don't know exactly. I don't know what that agreement looked like, and I don't know whether it needs some sort of, if this is it, whether it needs, some sort of a conclusion.
So I think that there had been agreement among many parties to facilitate the 35 Richardson open space creation, but nothing, I don't believe that anything was ever signed.
Okay.
No, nothing was ever recorded regarding this. The acquisition fell through because the development project fell through.
Okay.
So that, if that was the one that you're thinking of, I don't think any further action is going to be needed.
Yeah.
So the Blessing of the Bay project is, the design is also pretty far along, nearing completion. Actually, they have acquired funding from you most recently for construction. So that project is in the midst of being executed. The, oh, I have Blessing of the Bay twice in the folder. I'll have to check and see whether that's a duplicate. Doesn't matter at this point anyway. The Somerville Hispanic Association for Community Development, this is 59 Cross Street. They have 3 open grants, 21, 22, and 23, as well as an ARPA grant, which they're in the middle of completing the permitting to be able to get under construction on the whole project. So they anticipate, and the ARPA comes with a strict deadline this year. So they will be looking to spend the ARPA funds first, or at least get those under contract first. And that project anticipates being under construction this year. The 404 Broadway is Vida Real, the trying to remember the original name of it, the Winter Hill Congregational Church Bell Tower project. They came back to us, you recall, last year requesting funds for a condition assessment. That's the second project for this group. The first project was restoration of their bell tower. And this, they are also preparing to go back and complete the work on the bell tower, which we awarded them additional funds a year ago to complete this additional work, but they had to wait until the season was right in order to be able to do the work correctly. So I will be checking in with them. I'm going to make myself a note to check in with them to see if they have a timeline for completing that.
So thank you, Roberta. I just have a quick question. I'm looking at the grant report, and this is more of a point of clarification, possibly. It says percentage project completes. It says 90%, and then in the narrative, it says the completion of the tower is about 75% complete. So is it appropriate to understand that the tower is 75% complete, whereas the entire project is 90%? Is that how to read this?
I think that the funds are 90% spent.
Got it.
But we forward funded, so the second to last payment has been paid out to them, but they're waiting to complete the actual work. And we won't make the final payment until the work is completed.
Thank you for clarifying. That's very helpful.
The Dilboy Stadium just broke ground last week. So this project, CPA funded design, I think in what, 2019 or 2017?
I think it was
Way back.
2017. The project started construction. Well, the stadium started construction in 2019.
Okay, so the CPA did not fund the stadium portion of the project. CPA is funding the auxiliary fields design, which I believe is ARPA funded for construction.
Yeah, it's entirely ARPA funded for construction.
Yeah, and so that just got underway now. So that's another successful project that had been stuck, but is moving forward finally. The Glen Park project is nearly completed. It is, or is it actually, well, there are still perhaps some punch list items left to be done, but there will be a ribbon cutting for that. Actually, I think I neglected to share that with all of you, so I will give you that information unless you have it handy, John, I will look it up. We can't hear you. You're muted.
Sorry. Yeah, I know it's Tuesday. Let me just look at the exact time. 1 second.
And what does the weather look like for Tuesday to see if we're looking at the,
So it's at 11:30, and then we have a rain date on the Friday.
Friday the 30th? No, Friday the 3rd.
I think Friday the 3rd. It's not in my
Yeah.
calendar, but I can pull up.
And
the
I think
dates.
that's also, well, okay, let me look at my calendar so that I have the correct date for you. The ribbon cutting is 11:30 on Tuesday, the 30th, or I don't have the Friday rain date. Oh,
10:15, it looks like.
okay.
Oh, nope, sorry, that's our field trip. Never mind.
Yeah,
I do not
that's the
have it on my
problem. I have the field trip and not the, um,
Sorry, I will get that from Allison and I can email you, Roberta, about it.
thank you, and I'll forward that to everyone. So I probably can already forward it because I think I have that information as well.
And just real quick before we get much past it, on the Dilboy Auxiliary Field project,
Mhm.
John, when you say that it's 100% ARPA funded, do you mean 100% ARPA funded plus the CPC funding, or is it no longer need CPC funding?
The construction is 100% ARPA funded, and then the
But-
design was
The
CPC.
design or CPC, okay, thank you. So so is the design all done? So our portions all done?
There's still some construction administration. So we have, I think, like $15,000 left in CPA funds. And then ARPA is going to pay for the remaining construction administration.
Okay, thank you.
So moving on, the Healy Tot Lot is completed. I want to make sure that I'm not, yeah, so the Healy Tot Lot has just completed. They just submitted a letter authorizing me to close that project out with remaining 48,390 to be returned to the open space reserve. So that will be nice that we can have a little bit of extra funds to put toward open space this round. And the Healy School playground, I probably should have included in the list of project updates because that was just completed over this past year. But the design for the rear part of the Healy School playground was funded with CPA, and that also completed this past year. And I think that was entirely spent out. I don't think there were any funds left over from that. Henry Hansen Park is out to bid right now. I'm sorry.
I think we got the bids back. We selected a contractor. I'm blanking on the contractor. I think it was JJ Phelan. And that project should be rolling along right now.
Okay. Thank you. And Junction Park is under construction right now. And the Kennedy Schoolyard is just mobilizing. The grant was just awarded for that. So those are all of our outstanding projects right now. Did I mention the museum?
No.
I am pretty sure that I received I'll check. So we are missing, definitely we are missing the Elizabeth Peabody House, owe us a report. And I think I may have received one from the Somerville Museum and neglected to put it in your folder. So I will check on that. And I will follow up next month with the missing reports.
Is
And
the
then can
Adams
you
Lagoon
remind
House-
me what was the sort of outcome of the art farm funds? We had decided to leave that earmarked, or
Yes, I knew you were going to ask that, and I made the director Rich Raish meet with me last week so that I could have an answer to that question. And what he told me is that the tank is excavated and they're in the process of drilling the anchors. So there's approximately 1 year left of construction for the underground portion of the site. Design will be done over the same time over this next year. So construction on Art Farm should take place in late 2025, early 2026. So that means that they're just about ready to use the CPA funds and they will CPA funds for the CPA funds are only meant to be used for construction, not for design, is what he told me. So he said that we should by the fall move forward with putting the motion on the council agenda. It's too late to get it in before the summer this year, but come the fall, it will be the right timing for that funding to go through city council approval so that they will be able to use it for construction. So because that project has never even been approved by city council yet, I didn't feel like the full grant report was appropriate, but I wanted to get the information for you.
Great,
So
thank
that
you.
means
Yeah,
that
thank you.
you're welcome. So that means that, and I may actually, let me see if I have a spreadsheet. I do have a spreadsheet open that summarizes all of the projects that are ongoing. And I believe that I have not received something from the museum. So I will follow up with the museum and the Elizabeth Peabody House to ask for their grant reports to send to you next month.
Sure, that sounds great. Eric, I think you had some thoughts as well.
I was curious what happened to the Adams Magoon place, because that wasn't some kind of.
That is a very good question. It is held up because of bureaucracy on the city side. So I am crossing my fingers that once we're able to get through our own red tape, that the applicant will still be interested in moving forward with this project. So that's the best report that I can give on the Adams Magoon House at the moment. I'm crossing my fingers that we can help them because the house really does need help.
Well, thank you.
Yeah,
Great.
good question.
Thank you. I just want to take a moment to see if any of the committee members have any other questions for Roberta or for any one of us here.
I just want to say that it's really exciting to see so many things that were stuck and delayed and in the sort of ether moving forward and coming to completion. It's really a tremendous kind of honor roll to run through all of those. That's great.
I certainly second what Heather has said, and Roberta, thank you for giving us a concise rundown of a fairly long list. We really do appreciate that. One item I do have wanted to understand, it's not particularly related to any specific funded project, but when it comes to the closeout process, is it I know that there's some funds that are held back, but from an administrative perspective, are there any other steps that are taken before a particular funded project is considered to be closed out within the CPA area?
That's a very good question. So the projects are treated differently if it's a city department that's using the funds versus an outside organization. If it's a city department, then usually the project manager within the city department is contracting with a vendor to do the work. And those projects, the invoices, the project manager is keeping track of the work as it's being completed and approves the invoices to be paid directly to those vendors. And we don't have a specific process for closing out the work. The one thing is that I do require a letter if the project is being closed out with funds remaining before I will release the funds back into the reserve. Because once the funds are released back into the reserve, the grant no longer exists and the funds can never be accessed again. So I want to make sure that all of the funding that's intended for the project is available as long as that project is ongoing. So the for non-city applicants, we have two options for paying their disbursements. The first and less common option is to be a reimbursement grant, where they spend the funds to complete the project and then submit documentation of what they've spent, and we will reimburse them for what they've spent. The more common option that they choose is forward funding. We call it phased disbursements, where they will outline in advance a specific set of payments that they're going to receive based on milestones or percentage completed. And so we will give a portion of the money of first disbursement as soon as the contract is signed. And then when they've spent that disbursement, they can submit to us the invoices that they've received from their contractors and proof that they've paid their contractors for the disbursement that we already gave them. Then we'll give them the next disbursement. And so up until the last disbursement, that's how it works. The last disbursement is a 10% holdback. And we will not pay out the 10% holdback until the project is completed and they show that all invoices have been paid. So we don't forward fund the last payment. It's a reimbursement payment. So that each time they submit a request for payment, if it's an outside organization, they have to submit essentially the same report form that I use for the annual report. So we get this report throughout the year whenever we receive a request for a disbursement from an outside grantee.
Great, Roberta, thank you so much. That's very, very insightful. I was always curious about the closeout process, so that's certainly appreciated. I just want to see if committee members have any other questions, comments, items, anything else before we move on. Seeing none, so thank you, Roberta. I think we can move on to the next item, which is review OSRP summary. Roberta, I'm not sure if you have any introductory remarks or items to mention, or should we hand it over to John? I leave it to you.
I just wanted to make one more comment about the last item, which is that especially during the annual review period and over the summer, when we have some time to think about our procedures and things, I highly welcome questions and discussion about procedures, because I think it's really helpful for committee members to be aware and to be able to provide input on how our procedures work. So there's so much that's given to us by the city. We must do it this way, but there's also a lot that has been established through the precedent and decisions that the CPC has made along the way. So to the extent that we can, I think it's always helpful to continue taking a look at it. But with that, I wanted to move on and see whether, John, you want to give us a quick partial summary now, or if you'd like to hold on for another month.
Yeah, I'm happy to do a virtual summary right now. I
Sure.
would hope to provide a more robust summary of the OSRP, but with PSEF being a little short-staffed right now and a lot of construction projects taking off, the OSRP is moving a little bit slower than we had anticipated. But that being said, Allison and I were both out all day today looking at our parks, doing park inspection reports, and taking analysis of things that are working and things that aren't working in our parks and speaking with the users of the parks to see what they like about it and what they don't like and improvements that can be made to our open space in the city. But I did want to kind of give a little summary of what we heard during our outreach. And all of this will go into a deeper dive once we've kind of collated all of our information, have reviewed our previous goals outlined in our previous OSRP and our new goals that we're trying to achieve in the next OSRP. And we hope to present these to you all, get your feedback on it, incorporate those comments, and then we can issue our final OSRP and send it off to Melissa Cryan with the Massachusetts Environment and Energy Affairs team. So some of our summary of our outreaches, we had multiple community meetings in a bunch of different wards throughout the city. We hosted in-person events. We hosted virtual events. We've done a lot of tabling. We had an OSRP survey that I believe had more than 1,000 participants take our survey and provide feedback on. So we really got a robust review from all different parties. We met with all different commissions and committees. We met with all different programs, youth programs, senior programs throughout the city. So we really cast a broad net to gather this information. Now we're just sitting on a large pile of information that we're trying to connect all the points and see the common threads throughout them. But some of these threads that we're starting to see, some of them are pretty straightforward, and some of them are kind of interesting and very niche to Somerville. But some of them are more open space, more trees, more shade, as there's a lot of concern about the changing climate and how our parks are going to be adapted to that, and how we can kind of create spaces in our parks to help deal with the heat island effect throughout urban areas. So more trees, more shade. A big thing that we're hearing a lot is improved accessibility. And the improved accessibility isn't just including pathways and circulation. It's accessible furniture throughout all of our parks. It's kind of taking play features or playgrounds that don't have any accessible play features, and trying to modify some of those features to incorporate accessible elements. There's also a big push to have a universal playground, and a universal playground. Universal design is just one step further than ADA. It kind of pushes the ball to not just make things ADA compliant, but make sure that every single person can use any play feature and be a part of the larger group playing there. So we heard a lot about having a universal playground. That's why we came to the CPA for additional funds for the Kennedy School, because they have a large group of children with disabilities there. And so we think it's the perfect combination to provide a universal playground, but also provide a space for about 20% of Kennedy School's population. Other elements that we heard were improved green infrastructure. This kind of goes back to the changing climate and how can we make our parks more multifunctional? How can we deal with stormwater? How can we deal with the dying of different pollinators and different species? How can we prevent invasive species from coming into our spaces? So that's kind of what I mean by green infrastructure. Then there's also some comments about access to natural spaces. And we're still kind of doing a deeper dive in what people mean by natural spaces. Is it a park with trees, or is it more like the Fells or Blue Hills, or something more large or robust forested? But there was lots of comments about natural spaces. And then I think the final large item is improved connectivity to the network of parks. You know, we have all these small parks throughout the space. Somerville's very dense. It's very hard for us to acquire large swaths of land. So kind of creating these better bike networks, working with the mobility team to really improve accessibility between these spaces and create safe routes for kids, for bikers, for parents, and everyone to kind of navigate through these spaces. And then, so I guess next steps are, Allison and I are still doing a lot of work on this OSRP. We're trying to compile a lot of this data and produce a report. Once we've kind of gathered all that data and have a rough draft of this document, we have a designer who's working to kind of compile this and create the graphics for us. So we're going to hand this document off to the designer and then also go out to all of our different committees and kind of speak about what we heard and here's where we are, and making sure that we have heard you all and have recorded the comments correctly. And then once we gather that information, we will rework the OSRP and put out a final draft.
Great.
Thank you.
Of course, thank you.
So I just wanted to see if committee members have any questions for John. And John, thank you so much for your summary / overview. We look forward to a more fulsome update, in subsequent meetings. But in the meantime, if there are any questions, comments for John, it would be great. Heather, please.
John, first of all, what a project. And it's really great that you did all that. And I guess my kind of top question is, out of all those different outreach methods that you used, which are the ones that do you think could most readily transfer to the CPC and reaching a more diverse grant pool?
So I think some of it's a tricky question, because I think the best approach to outreach is like a multi-pronged approach, like we had these larger community meetings where anyone could show up. It was kind of like one demographic of parents with their kids, because they were usually in schools or libraries. They just stopped in to hear a little bit about it. So that reached one group, and then we started reaching out and doing tabling and surveying, and we started to see, in the questions we're asking, what's your age, what's your demographic, what are your interests? And then we can kind of see where our missing pieces are. And then from there, we noticed, we're really not getting youth input on this survey. We're really not getting the senior citizens input on this. So then we went directly to them. We spoke with different parties throughout the city and said, can you connect us with the youth? We spoke with the recreation department. They connected us with the youth basketball league. And so we were able to speak with them. We went to, I believe Malik went to a bingo night at the senior, one of the senior complexes, and he was able to ask a lot of questions there. So I feel like for us, it was, try and reach as many people as you can, try and figure out who you're reaching out, and then look back at that data and see like the missing links, and then kind of go directly to the source.
That takes a small army, of course.
Yes, it does.
Actually,
Um,
your answer, John, made me wonder whether there was some firewall or any reason you couldn't just go to social studies classes, in the school district and say, here's what we're doing, and just try and get, all of the kids in those classes to fill out the survey.
Yeah, I do know that sometimes this is especially with the youth and kids, that if you go into their class and force them to do something, they're not going to be willing to do it. But if you can find these like extracurricular activities that they're kind of a part of, and kind of try and like weave the things, that's why we did a lot of athletic groups and different groups that we thought, like it seems like you use the park spaces, but we're not getting any input from you, and really try and like pull it out.
Yeah. The thing, the bias there though, is when you go to the athletic groups, is you're just getting the athletic kids that are using them in an athletic way, as
Mhm.
opposed to more passive recreation kids that aren't necessarily in those groups. I do understand what you're saying about the teachers, but I guess it would be interesting if it could almost be worked into their, like a short, curricula, like a really focused curriculum, like, here's one of the things the cities have to do. You can help us, you can help us.
Yeah, that would be a wonderful idea. And maybe in our next OSRP, that's some way that we can kind of incorporate it maybe into a curriculum, or even reach out to a teacher and say, like,
Yeah.
this is an OSRP, like, is there a way to mesh like the OSRP like research or interviewing into a specific class that
Yeah,
kind
exactly.
of them
That's what I was
to
saying.
do it? Yeah, that's a wonderful idea.
Great, thank you so much, David. So John, I do have a consideration for you and your colleagues, and you may already be considering this. One of the things that I think about when it comes to accessibility is also geographic proximity or access to a park.
Mhm.
We have a wonderful city here that's very dense. I believe still the densest in New England, unless the stats have changed. And with potentially more families, with children and even elderly and different populations with residing within the city. Have you and your colleagues considered looking at just basically access to open space based on wards or neighborhoods or any other classifications? If you have any thoughts about that, that would be great.
Yeah, so this goes kind of back to more of a desktop analysis. So what we'll do is our GIS specialist has kind of put all of our parks into GIS, and then we say, create a bubble that's a 5 minute walk, which is like half a mile from this space, and let's see where the voids are. And actually in that there's very few voids. I'll try and pull up the document and send it to you all. But really it's just kind of in like Inner Belt and like that kind of industrial area where we don't really have the parks or have the land to create parks there. But throughout the city, it is pretty much a wash of green of most people are within a 5 minute walk of a certain park or playground. But I
It's
will
wonderful.
definitely pull up that document and send it to you all. It's a really
Sure.
wonderful map.
Sure, John, and that's really wonderful to hear. It's a testament to what you and your colleagues have been able to accomplish, both now but also in the past, to provide that access because it's very easy to say, in a fairly urban environment that what's 10 minutes or 15 minutes walking. This is a great metric that you shared, and I certainly appreciate that. So, also, I wanted to see if any other committee members have any questions or comments for John.
I just want to have a comment on that analysis because I've heard that before, but I feel like it's a little bit misleading because it's like a half-mile walk from any kind of open space, play lot, community garden, which isn't always. I do think there are some wards that are don't have as much sort of service in terms of diversity or passive parks than other wards. So I feel like that analysis could it has like kind of a general green light on a very general level, but then it could get more granular from there.
Yeah, I think that's a wonderful idea to explore. And just one other thing is the national standard for these like park proximity maps is a 10-minute walk, so it's a mile from the park. But when we did that analysis, the entire city was covered in this. And then we said we need to kind of reduce this down to a smaller scale so we can kind of see where these missing links are. And so we reduced it down to a half a mile or a 5-minute walk. But this is also a wonderful idea, and it has been something that we've been exploring, is like kind of specifying the key feature of a park or open space and then saying, what are your proximity to playgrounds, to a sports field, to this and that.
Certainly. And thank you so much for sharing that, Heather. I think there's always room for optimization. And John, as you see fit, it would be terrific for you to share the information, whether it's in a future meeting or with the committee members here, because I think it's going to only further inform our understanding of the open space opportunities within the city of Somerville.
Yeah, more than happy to share that.
Thank you so much. Just wanted to see if anyone else has any thoughts, any lingering comments or questions for John. Seeing none. So John, thank you so much again for walking us through and also fielding our various questions. Certainly appreciate it, and we look forward to further information from you, further detailed information from you, and it's terrific what you and your colleagues have been doing. So thank you.
Thank you. Yeah.
Sure. So just going back to the agenda, we're going to move on to the review 5-year consolidated plan findings. I believe there is a document in the shared drive, but Roberta, do you mind taking taking the
Sure.
lead on the introduction? Thank you.
Absolutely, thank you. So I am representing the OSPCD's finance and admin team in presenting the findings from the 5-year consolidated plan. This is a project that has been ongoing since last fall. And similar to the OSRP, it's also a plan that's required, in this case, by the federal government. OSRP is state government. This is required by the federal government for purposes of programming the funding that they give us over the next 5 years. And so the city of Somerville receives approximately $3 million annually in funds from the federal government for the CDBG program, which is they fund projects and services for people with low and moderate incomes throughout the city, as well as the home program, which is specifically for affordable housing, and the ESG program, which is for people experiencing homelessness. And so the plan entailed a very extensive community and stakeholder engagement process to the degree that we had the staff power to be able to complete this within, we really have a hard deadline that we need to meet for completing this plan. So we did as much as we could within the time that we had, which entailed a lot of interviews with city staff, community partner organizations, and other stakeholders, community meetings, coalition working groups on certain issues. We partnered with neighborhood organizations to host community meetings so that they could work with their networks. And we had an online survey, which was specifically marketed toward people with low and moderate incomes. And we actually had a pretty decent response rate by people in the target group, including a significant number of unhoused people participated in this survey. So I thought that was really remarkable. And a number of non-English speaking people also participated in this survey. So the findings, unfortunately, the federal funding that we receive, which is comparable in scale to the CPA funding and closely overlaps in a lot of ways what the CPA funding is able to cover, the funding is not enough for the really overwhelming needs that the city has. The most critical need being for affordable housing. Particularly, we heard about the need for housing with wraparound services, that is for people who need support services to be able to live independently. Housing for families with larger sized units, housing for small households. Small households are doubling up so that they can be able to afford housing and thus taking the larger housing units that families could occupy. Home ownership opportunities are needed, as well as rental assistance. But in addition to the overwhelming need for affordable housing, there's also, I think the next thing that we heard the most about was a need for indoor space to accommodate public services and uses. The things that we most commonly heard the need for are a warming shelter or center or homeless shelter, Last year, the city hosted a seasonal warming shelter center at the Armory, which is a city-owned historic building that is in need of some restoration. And that continued use conflicts with other uses that the city has and plans that the city has for that building. So continuing to find the space to host both the cultural needs, the organization needs in general, and warming shelter are high priority. The next thing that we heard the most frequently was a youth or teen center, the need for recreation space for teens. The next is childcare. There's just a crisis of availability of space to offer childcare services in the city. And so we heard the need for multi-purpose intergenerational and free community spaces so that people can gather without having to buy a product to be able to be in public spaces. So these are supported in particular by some space needs studies that have been undertaken over the last 5 years to support the nonprofit sector in the community. So these reports are also publicly available. So we identified in the course of this project several city-owned buildings or buildings that the city leases that currently provide community services that are currently vacant and need upgrades. Several of these are historic buildings. So there's where the federal funding is very limited to be able to facilitate these projects, there's perhaps an overlap with the CPA program to consider the need for historic buildings to be able to be upgraded to continue to provide for these types of needs. And finally, we also heard about the need for open space, outdoor open space needs, especially focused on accessibility and maintenance. So John has a much more detailed understanding of open space needs, given the different focus of the parties that they interviewed and the questions that they asked. So from the lens of the CDBG program, we heard less in that area and more focused on accessibility and maintenance. So that's the overview of the CDBG plan as far as it relates to the mission of the CPC.
Great. Thank you so much, Roberta, for providing the overview. I'd like to open up the matter to the committee members to see if there's any discussion or any questions or comments for Roberta. Heather,
Roberta,
please. Oh, sorry, Ryan, go ahead.
sorry, please, Heather.
It was a question about in one of the opening paragraphs, and I don't know if it's appropriate to hone in on language, but it says that the there's considerable overlap between the federal funding programs and the project that the CPA supports. And I actually think that in some ways that's a misleading, because I feel like, especially with affordable housing, that the CPA funds are able to go places where the federal funds cannot go. And so rather than stressing its similarities, it may be for our purposes important to really have a handle on what is it that we can do that the federal funds can't do.
That's a good point. And when I draft updates to the plan and take these current planning processes into consideration, I can highlight that.
Great. Thank you so much, Heather. Ryan, I think you had some comments.
Sure, and I'll just first comment on Heather's question. personally, professionally on almost all of my Massachusetts projects, I have overlap between federal programs, including home funds and other HUD provided funds, and local CPA funds. So I'm happy to be a resource as that conversation continues. My question for Roberto is, when I saw the section about the space needs, there's a need for indoor space to accommodate public service uses, and I wondered to what extent the city has considered those needs in light of the plans or the push for the public safety building in East Somerville, and weighing that space, that proposal versus some of these older historic structures that are deteriorating, as noted. Are you aware if that's come up, if this opened any eyes about that?
I have not been part of any discussion where that came up, and I have to say that is that's outside the parameters of the federal funding project. I don't see any of these federal funds going into that project, so that's a good question, but probably for somebody on another level than our department.
Understood.
Great. Thank you so much, Ryan. Wanted to see if anyone else has any questions, comments, any other thoughts? Heather, please.
Yeah, I was just gonna again sort of compliment you on your work, because I thought it was really interesting to hear about the variety of kind of municipal spaces that people were looking for, and the needs that they were looking for. Some of them weren't things that would have been obvious to me. So I thought it was really an interesting summary.
Great.
you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Heather.
Yeah, maybe a question for the longer tenured Somervillians than myself on here. I mean, do we have a bona fide youth/teen center? Do we have an established community center for services like that? I genuinely don't know.
I don't know, John, whether this falls under the purview of the open space and recreation plan.
Yeah, we do not have a youth or teen center yet. It's something that people are very adamant that it's a must that we have to have. I know there was a previous development project, the Summer Nova project, that was going to propose a youth center within it. That project got pulled, so we're kind of looking at other avenues. This is kind of adjacent to Public Space and Urban Forestry Department, because ironically, we have the Public Space and Urban Forestry Department, then we have our Recreation Department, and we are separate. So that's kind of the project that they're spearheading, but it's something that we're trying to assist with and find them a space that would work best for them.
Okay, cool. Thanks, John.
In response to the same question, I don't know whether this horse has long left the barn, but I had kind of hoped for years that some part of Assembly Road could be carved out for a youth center, or for athletic, anything. I know that there's portions of it still being developed, but I don't know if the city has any leverage to try and, get some portion of it allocated for that.
Yeah, that's a great idea. I wonder if it would need to be written into the Assembly Square master plan. So I don't know if there's any language about a youth center in that master plan. But definitely
I'm pretty sure there isn't. It's something I talked about with the last administration quite a lot, and they didn't seem to have any appetite for trying to get it.
Mm-hmm.
I have, as the owner of 2 teens, I'm trying to think of what they do. And I mean, they create the space they need in a way, sort of old school, that they go to Assembly Row and their center is the stores and all that. But yeah, they could probably use a space. I think the Y in some ways provides that unofficially, in a way. If they're at all athletically involved, they'll go there and just kind of do that.
Yeah, the Y is there. When I first moved here, the Boys and Girls Club still was around.
Oh, right.
But those are both private. It's not it's not a municipal or even a quasi-municipal.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm all for a youth center. I mean, in my hometown, we were crying for a youth center for so long, and then I finally go off to college and they find the funds to build it then. The next generation will appreciate it.
I just wanted to add to the background on the recreation center. It's my understanding, and this was outside of my purview until I was working on this consolidated plan, is that youth services had been provided up until recently at the Edgerly Center. And because it's the cascade of problems because of the closure of the Winter Hill School, all of the things that had been going on at the Edgerly Center were displaced to other buildings. And space wasn't found to replicate the scale of services that were provided at the Edgerly Center, which I think were still not as much as what was needed at the time. So some of the uses that were at the Edgerly Center are now in building that's leased by the city for from Tufts is the owner of the building. So there's this cascading effect of a lack of space displacing, or the condition of buildings causing the displacement and the inability to be able to place the services in buildings that the city owns.
So that's very helpful. So I just wanted to see if there are any other comments or even discussion points for the committee members. I'd love to hear those thoughts before we move on to the next item. So seeing none, so Roberta, I think we can move on to the next item, which is review public engagement findings. Would you like to speak about or provide a synopsis of that as well?
Sure. So again, I provided this in your meeting packets. You had a very robust reading selection for this meeting. I took all of the public and stakeholder engagement that we undertook in the last year and summarized that in this document. So just quickly running through these, I don't want to belabor the subject, but happy to have some discussion where you want to stop me and talk about some of the things that we did. So the main engagement activities that took place over the past year were the annual public hearing last month. We did tabling at different locations and events throughout the summer and fall, last fall and summer and this winter in 2024. And we had surveys that were available online and in print. And we also had the Summer Voice page, which we have not been pushing. I'll acknowledge the Summer Voice page had no traffic this year. Last year we had some traffic. The Summer Voice page, well, the survey is open during a specific period, and it's open in all of the languages that we support, and we push it out at the tabling events in March. The Summer Voice page is open throughout the year. It just has interactive opportunities for giving us feedback on work that we're doing, as well as some information about the CPA program, but it's not particularly well publicized. So that seems that it's not really getting a lot of traffic. So the annual public hearing, you were all there for the public hearing with the exception of Ryan last month. And I think you said that you watched the videos. So you were all able to see what we learned from the annual hearing last month. Tabling events is very interesting because we get very consistent results from all of the tabling events that we go to. So there's a table on the second page that aggregates the results from all of the tabling events that we had last year. And averaging all of those events, the breakdown of funding is approximately what the committee, or the breakdown of the program area distribution preferences that people gave us is approximately what the committee's breakdown of funding is. What the committee has decided the program allocation will be year to year.
Right. So sorry, Roberta, if you don't mind sharing the report on your screen. The reason why I
Sure.
mentioned that is because it has some great graphics, great information that's both quantitative and qualitative, and I think the committee members would benefit from getting a visual as well. Thank you.
Sure. Yeah.
Thank you so
So you
much.
should be able to see the document on your screens now.
Yes, we can.
And I'll blow it up a little bit. Maybe that will help you to be able to see it better. So this is the table that I was mentioning on the second page that summarizes all of those tabling events that we held. And all of the comments, so whenever we do the tabling events, I'm just going to show the photo of one of the tabling events. We invite people to we give them a strip of 5 dots. For those of you who haven't been at the tabling events till now, I can't recall, I think most of you have been. We give people a strip of 5 dots and invite them to spend $3 million, which is our annual budget. And that's the 5 dots equate to $3 million, and they can distribute it between the program areas however they would like. And if they have specific ideas to talk with us about, we write them on these sticky notes and put them on the board. And so these are the notes that people wrote on the board. So I'm not going to go and read them all, but you can study them in the document if you have a chance. One of the interesting comments that someone gave us is that she had her yard tested and it's full of lead. So that she would like to have more parks and playgrounds to go to because she's not comfortable letting her children play extensively in her backyard. So that's, I think, probably a common Somerville problem to keep in mind. A lot of people reiterate over and over again, renovate City Hall. In particular, City Hall gets a lot of mentions, both in the tabling events and the survey. And a lot of people talk to us about the fact that they can't afford to stay in Somerville. That's commonly what we hear when people approach the table. So now reviewing the online survey, the first question that we ask is, what ward do people live in? So this gives us a visual picture of how much are we engaging with people from different parts of the city. So 1 being blue, so this is Ward 1, Ward 2, Ward 3, Ward 4, we have fewer people participating, as well as Ward 1, fewer people participating. Ward 5 is well represented. Ward 6 is fairly well represented, as well as Ward 7. And the remaining small slivers are people who live outside of Somerville or don't know which ward they live in. And yeah, so just wards 1 and 6, no, wards 1 and 4 are probably the areas where we're reaching the fewest people. The program area funding distribution is very similar to what we see in the tabling events. And so I tried in the next section to summarize what we heard in the, 16 pages or 10 pages of comments that I've duplicated in this report. So in open space and recreation, we hear that there's a broad desire to increase the quantity of open space, especially in areas that currently have less. West and East Somerville are most frequently mentioned. Respondents suggest that they'd like to see more passive green space with seating, picnic tables, or spaces that offer community gathering opportunities for people of all ages. They'd like to see an increase in tree cover, as well as native plantings or forests in the city. Many respondents would like to see improvements to existing parks and open spaces, and ones that are frequently mentioned are Foss Park, Trumfield, Dillboy, the waterfront along the Mystic River, Seven Hills Park, Union Square, and the community path. And the good news is that we actually have some of these projects currently underway that we've funded. In terms of historic preservation, respondents most frequently highlighted city-owned buildings that they would like to see improved, with a strong emphasis on City Hall, as well as mentions of the former fire station in Union Square, the Central Library, the Armory, and the church building at 45 College Avenue. Several respondents indicated that they would prioritize projects which increase handicap accessibility. And some commented that they'd like to see energy efficiency upgrades to historic buildings. And in the category of affordable housing, most comments underscore the need for more affordable housing in general, including housing for people who are unhoused, for families, for city employees, and for working class residents. Some specific strategies supported by respondents include social housing, housing vouchers, converting existing buildings to affordable housing, or supporting the community land trust. And finally, respondents would like to see an increase in housing supply through higher density development, increased heights, and relaxed building restrictions. Of course, the CPC has limited ability to affect a lot of the things that people are asking for with respect to affordable housing, because we delegate to the Affordable Housing Trust the responsibility to spend the CPA funds for affordable housing. But we can certainly communicate these comments to the Affordable Housing Trust that we've heard about community priorities. So finally, the survey included a demographic composition section to help us see who is answering the survey in comparison with the overall population of the city. Respondents tend to be, a higher number of respondents tend to be older. There's disproportionately more respondents who are aged 35 to 65 compared to the population, but there are fewer respondents who are aged 20 to 34 compared to the population, fewer seniors and fewer people under age 20. In terms of household income, the respondents are tend to be higher income, with a larger share having $150,000 income or more, with fewer respondents having lower middle incomes. There is actually the $50,000 to $75,000 annual income was well represented and proportionately represented for the 75 to 100,000, and the 25 to 50,000 are proportionately represented. But the lowest income people in the community are less well represented in the survey. And then we see that survey respondents are more likely to be homeowners than renters. This is incorrect. It is the same colors as the table above. So the ACS 2022 is the blue column, and oh, no, I'm sorry, this is backwards. So I do have this backwards. So the survey respondents tend to own rather than rent. I'm sorry, I didn't notice that this was backwards, and so I've confused myself in how this table is represented. So that gives an overall picture of who are the survey respondents. And then the remainder is the actual comments that are received in the open-ended questions throughout the survey, which I will leave for your own review. So that concludes my summary of the public engagement that we've heard this past year.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Roberta. And I know that it takes quite a bit of effort of compiling all the survey respondent comments as well as the data, and I certainly appreciate all your efforts in getting us a consolidated and concise report that's easy to use. And I certainly encourage my fellow committee members to take a look even after this meeting, just to reorient themselves with respect to the outreach efforts, the engagement, but also some of the stats that we're seeing. And I think, as we talk about the subcommittee, in a subsequent series of meetings, the subcommittee around outreach, I think it's going to help us. These types of reports and information pieces are going to help us target, for example, Roberta, you mentioned if income, on the lower income scale, the less than 20 years of age, higher than over 65, or I think it was the senior citizens category. Some of the other social aspects that we want to make sure that we increase the outreach to ensure that we get feedback and thoughts from all residents of Somerville, irrespective of where they reside and what their social characteristics may be. So I think this is really helpful. So again, I want to ask my fellow committee members to see if there are any questions, comments for Roberta, or even discussion points for within the committee as well. I just want to open up the floor to see if anybody has any thoughts.
So I've been on the committee for a couple of years now, and I feel like the way we've been, breaking up, our funding has been kind of set in our, we haven't changed that, although we do a lot of this table, you may get a lot of this information. So I guess I'm kind of wondering exactly, except for validation, that we're generally doing things in the, that have the support of the community. Is there a more fine bore goal of doing this sort of tabling, and should we be looking at the proportion like that first table, in the summary, and be kind of considering whether we fine tune, how we, apportion, the money we distribute each year. I actually don't think it's that far off, from what we do anyway, but it's not quite the same.
Yeah, I mean, those are really great points, David. I want to see if other committee members have any thoughts, and see where we can go with this, and how to apportion in a way that meets the needs of the residents of Somerville, in all aspects. If there are any thoughts, I'd love to encourage some conversation / discussion here. Heather, please.
I think along those lines, there was, I think at the annual meeting, it came up that, not all towns earmark the funds per categories the way that we do. And it has been pretty consistent in terms of the feedback that we've gotten from our outreach efforts and how we've been allocating, given that we also like to have our little flexible slice to give us some, it's almost too nuanced to get into that in an outreach effort. But I think I would advocate for I thought it through, like, would it be worth it not to sort of earmark things as carefully and let the whole thing sort of be a little more fluid based on the application pool? But I think it is actually really good to continue to earmark them the way that we have, because it continues to grow these very specific funds intentionally towards different goals. And I don't, so like when the grant money comes back from open space, it goes back into open space, like I just feel like that sort of, it keeps that promise there. So that's just sort of a response to this question about how we allocate the funds
Yeah,
and slice up the
Yeah,
pie.
and to be clear, I certainly do agree with that. I wouldn't necessarily want to undo that allocation. It's more a question is, when we are giving people, when we're doing the kind of the multi-strip voting and we're saying, how would you like to distribute the money we give out each year? To me, it kind of suggests that we actually are taking that feedback into our considerations to how we distribute the money each year. Now, I think the public outreach is important in and of itself. But if we want to if we're going to say, well, we're going to distribute 50% here and 25% here and 25% here, then maybe that's just what our outreach should be, is we can tell them here, and not maybe create an illusion that they have an influence on how we're allocating it.
Yeah, I think that goes back to the question, at what point do you have a large enough sampling that you feel that it's a mandate versus a kind of
Right. And
a suggestion of what the priorities should be.
right. And I don't know that it should be a mandate. That's kind of, but I do think we can take it into consideration. We've been doing it for a number of years. So, I mean, we do have quite a bit of data. And my recollection is it's always about the same, that it's, around 50% affordable housing. And then usually I do think that the open space is probably a little more popular than preservation, not, but I think we've agreed that we should split it. And I think that's what we do. Is that correct, Roberta? That the other 50% is, or is it not even, or is it split, or is it reversed the other way? I forget what our allocation is.
What I'm going to suggest is the next item on the agenda is talking about the goals, and we're sort of merging into that discussion. And I had in preparation for that,
okay, then I'll table this.
No, I wouldn't say we're tabling. We're just like the natural conclusion of all of this information that we've just delivered in the last hour is to talk about the goals.
Right.
And so I wanted to bring up the presentation that I gave last month at the annual meeting, because I think this will provide us with some aid to talking about what we're talking about. So I'm just going to share my screen.
Yeah, but when I said table, what I kind of meant is I didn't want to keep you from discussing the other elements of that, the summary,
I completed the summary. So
okay.
we're ready to talk about the goals and the annual funding allocation. This is something that's actually going to be on your agenda to vote on next month, is what should the annual funding allocation be for FY25. But there's no reason why you can't discuss it now and come to a tacit agreement about what it's going to be, so that I can prepare the estimate for you next month, showing what it will look like with the allocation that you talk about this evening. So this on the screen shows what the what your spending distribution has been, or what's been budgeted over the last several years. You've had the same distribution rate for the 3 different program areas. So that's what you've been talking about, is whether to continue with this, whether to change it, or whether it's something that you should continue to ask for people's input on, or just take it as a given that it's for the committee to decide.
Seems to me that pretty closely matches what the numbers that you've obtained, especially if you take the flexible, and that tends to get divided up between the preservation and the open space. So if you allocate that just arbitrarily half and half, so 20 and 25%, versus what was it, 18 and what was the average for open space in your surveys?
Like
30.
32.
32, and then affordable housing was like 46 or something.
46, yeah.
Does the flexible, is the flexible really generally divided between historic preservation and open space, or does some of the flexible sometimes go to affordable housing as well?
It is generally used just for the historic preservation and open space. But what we've done to try to make sure that we keep it as even as possible is that fall correction, where we receive more revenue than was anticipated. The committee allocates a portion of that to the Affordable Housing Trust to keep it in the 50% proportion.
Keep it-
Well, the other two program areas may be flexible anyway.
Yeah. Have you ever done, or has anyone ever done any analysis of shortfalls on kind of an annualized basis in these categories, regarding, the proposals we've gotten and what we couldn't afford to fund?
I have not. That would be a good question. I think there had been a period of time just before I started when we were in the midst of the pandemic, and I think that the requests for funding were not as high as they had been previously. And I haven't gone back to see what the historic requests for funding were. But in the 2 or 3 years that I've been working with you all, I have seen the funding requests approximately equal to the availability of funds, but where the requests were more than the funding available, you were able to negotiate with applicants to phase their projects out so that you could help them to move forward while staying within the funding that was available. But nevertheless, I could probably find out what was the original ask compared with
And
where we ended up.
Do you have, I mean, my impression has been that we don't often have enough open space and recreation grants to spend all of that money, but we often have more grant requests in historic preservation than we have allocated. So we tend to dip into the flexible fund a lot more frequently to fund historic preservation, just because we have a different applicant pool between the two.
Typically,
So-
although this last year we did dip into the flexible funding for the open space and recreation, we had some larger construction projects that came up this year.
So I was just tinkering off to the side here, looking at the most recent month in which we had the budget update, which I think was the February 28th meeting. And so ignorant of what the actual budgets are, forgetting about what went into the flexible funds or the undesignated funds or any of that, I was just curious, of the awards we made in this fiscal year, how do they split between historic preservation and open space and recreation? And as of that 228 meeting, we were like almost 50-50 identical between the two. It was, by my count here, it's 964K to 970K. So they were like almost dead on. And obviously we flexed some budget categories to get there, right? We pulled from undesignated fund or budgeted reserve or whatever. But I think to Heather's point, that's kind of the water kind of found its level between the two categories. That doesn't mean it's the same number of applications, right? It looks to me, just eyeballing it, like there were more historic preservation applications than open space and recreation, but the open space and recreation were larger on average. So something to keep in mind. I know the percent differences proposed are not that vast, 20% versus 15%, but that's just this year anyways.
On the screen, I'm illustrating exactly what Ryan has reported from this past year. And this is the entire history of spending that we've had. And
Thank
so
That's
You're welcome.
super helpful, and glad you checked my math.
That's good.
That quickly.
Can you go back? Can you go back to the first one briefly?
Yes.
And so 24, well, yeah, it's exactly even, although long term, it's weighted to historic preservation a bit more.
Yeah. And if you look at the, we don't have a list of the projects. The larger historic preservation projects that we've funded have been around handicap accessibility. So the largest was the West Branch Library. And there were also accessibility projects at the Somerville Museum, the Hispanic Association, and early project that predates all of us on the committee, I think, was the synagogue, which was a elevator installation. So that, I think that contributes probably to the largest portion of those historic preservation projects, just for context.
Curious how we're able to amass the surplus we do, given that in my just only several year period, it seems like we're always kind of trying to find ways to squeeze more out of what we have. Were there actually years when we just didn't have enough applicants and we had money up for grabs?
There were a few years in which we accumulated revenue that wasn't spent because of a couple of reasons. I had last year gone through an exercise to identify how much funding had been carried over from previous years, and found that there was about, I think, 1.5 million or so that had accumulated that hadn't been spent. And we've actually spent that down considerably in the last two funding rounds.
And that's, and Eric, and I think that's a good point, because we talked about that a bit when we were starting to dip into those reserves with regard to how did we get them in the first place, and what was the likelihood that they would gradually build up again, if we use them now, which was, I think, one of the reasons that we went fairly conservative with regard to how much of a reserve to continue to maintain.
I think the primary source of those surplus reserves were because unspent administrative funds rolled over into the undesignated fund. And because for several years we received more revenue through both the surcharge and the state match than we had budgeted for. And those are probably the biggest sources of that funding that built up.
And that seems like getting more revenue than we expect from the state seems like a thing of the past.
It may be, unfortunately. We don't have as great a picture. Next month, I'm going to give you the financial picture for FY25. And I don't anticipate that we're going to continue to be as flush.
And before I forget, we talked about it last month too, I brought it up last month, was that the difference, the open space and recreation, going back to Heather's point, that we often don't get as many open space and recreation plans. I think there's, just because of the nature of that beast, I think that, I feel like we've recognized that when open space becomes available, you have to, the city's gonna have to move quickly to acquire it, and kind of more of an emphasis on having an open space trust fund to readily be able to, so even if we don't have those applications, I would be reluctant to see us not try to have money continue to be allocated for that. I know we spoke about that with John last month about, making sure that the city makes that request each year, so that we can allocate, funding to it.
Yes, I completely agree. I think allocating to that fund is very important to open space. I do apologize for us not applying this year. That was a lapse in my workload, and I do apologize for that. But
Yep, well, that's fine. It just has to come out of your salary.
well, we'll see.
I don't think you're going to buy much open space in Somerville on John's salary.
I'll buy a brick. I do think though, like Our open space projects are kind of tricky because they're very long running. Sometimes we're very concerned about how much to ask of the CPC for these projects. I feel like a lot of the times we use this CPC to fund the design to get things kicked off, so then we can go to capital project, to, my apologies, not capital projects, to our CIP process to acquire the funds and have city council vote on that. I think
So John,
Mo-
does the city have a mechanism for, a parcel becomes available that would make a good open space? I mean, and it's basically market rate. Can the city ever acquire something like that?
Yes, I think a few of the issues are that we need to be fast acting. Developers obviously come in and say, here, I can buy it right now. And we have to go and get this approval from like multiple departments, get a city council vote, and then we can actually acquire the parcel. So that's kind of one concern that we have with acquiring parcels. We are always looking into acquiring new parcels and are very eager to jump on those. It's kind of like when a parcel comes up, it's drop everything, do all of your research, and figure out how we can acquire that parcel.
Does the city have an open space acquisition fund, kind of like what we talk, where
Yes.
which is kind of can be streamlined or fast tracked some of those steps?
That's something that we're definitely looking into. We do have a separate open space acquisition fund from the city that money goes in from development and other revenue sources that kind of funds that project, that pot of money.
An important difference between the Open Space Acquisition Fund versus the Affordable Housing Trust Fund. The Affordable Housing Trust Fund, once we put the money into the Affordable Housing Trust Fund, they can spend it. They go through their own project, their own application process, and they do not need to go back to City Council to spend their money. It's theirs and they can spend it. Whereas with the Open Space Acquisition Fund, even if we pre-approve the spending of money for an open space acquisition, it still requires city council to acquire the property. So there isn't any way to get around having to go to city council and really having to go through all of the same channels that lead up to a city council vote to decide to make that decision for acquisition. I don't know that there is any way to shortcut the process.
Well, it would have to be already passed. It would have to be like the city council would have had to like kind of say, we're allocating this money already now for, some future parcel that becomes available.
But
almost like pre-approved.
the parcel itself would have to be approved by city council.
Yeah,
So
no,
even if they
you're right.
pre-approve the money.
Yeah.
So, I mean, a difference is that the Affordable Housing Trust works with partners. So the Affordable Housing Trust is not itself acquiring property. They have nonprofit partners who make the property acquisition, and then the city is able to be a party to that acquisition, but without requiring the city council approval. So we don't have an equivalent process for open space that allows that shortcut.
Mm-hmm. And also the parcels, it's roughly $20 million to acquire an acre of open space, an acre of property in the city of Somerville. So the amount of money that we need to kind of build up in these banks is a lot to be able to buy small pieces of land.
Right.
And we also want to make sure that we're strategic in where we're acquiring the land.
Right. I'm really glad that David raised this matter because, John and Roberta as well. One thing I'm wondering is that when it comes to the open space acquisition, have there been any discussions around incentivizing the sellers towards city of Somerville and its agencies over private developers? Because I feel like, in many instances, maybe this is anecdotal, but many instances, developers tend to have deeper pockets. They can move quickly to acquire these parcels. I guess what I'm asking about, John, is that have there been any discussions around where your department and city of Somerville in general will have an edge over, or possibility of an edge over over open space acquisitions, whether it's monetary incentives or other types of incentives that might be possible.
We can definitely look at other incentives. Usually what happens is that we try and have directors or different members reach out to these parties that are trying to sell the parcel and start that conversation early. But money really is the big swayer. And like you said, developers have very deep pockets. And when they find out how much we're proposing, they'll just add 10% to that, add 20% and try and acquire the parcel of land.
Right. Also, when it comes to the offers that are being sent over, is that a public process? Because I mean, in a private sale transaction, you don't necessarily have to disclose how much you're offering. Can you talk a little bit about that? And I don't want to get too deep into it. I just want to support, the efforts here.
Yeah, I actually can't speak to that. I don't really know. Usually in those meetings, I'm not privy to those conversations, so I don't really know how they go about and if it's a public like if it's a public offer or if it's kind of more
Right.
discussed in closed doors.
Right. No, I completely understand that, John, but thank you.
Jahan, is the question if publicly owned land is going through a disposition process, or are you talking about a privately owned property?
So Ryan, this is more around privately owned property. That's where it gets really tricky, and that's where that's where I'm trying to see if we, even though it's not under our purview, of course, from a CPA perspective, but we in the context of supporting supporting acquisitions, and seeing whether we can make be competitive. When I say we, I'm talking about city of Somerville as a whole, not just the CPA here.
Understood.
But very interesting. Sorry, I didn't mean to get this conversation off track. I wanted to see if there are any other thoughts about how we want to approach the apportionment matter. And also, Roberta, while we're having this conversation, are you expecting us to provide the percentages that you had in the other table for this meeting, or is this something that we need to consider for our next scheduled meeting?
We can do either. If you were ready to provide what you want to fill in this table at this meeting, I would take that information and develop a model. If you did not do that, I would develop a model based on last year's allocation, and you could tell me if you wanted to change the allocation. So I'm happy to do whatever you feel ready to do tonight.
Great.
What I also was hoping to discuss, but this is also something that could be postponed until next week or next month, is what I just had on the screen, the community preservation plan priorities. I developed for the previous meeting, this is the presentation which is in the meeting packet for the March meeting this year. There's just a brief summary of what are all of the priorities that are listed in the community preservation plan. And then the more in-depth is on the next series of slides after that. So we could talk about the goals themselves this evening as was on the agenda, or you could go home and absorb this information, everything that we've talked about this evening, and give me comments next month if you would like to make any tweaks to the priorities that are listed in the plan. I'll be giving you a whole complete draft plan at the next meeting. So I will leave it up to you whether you'd like to talk about the funding priorities, the goals, or continue the conversation next month.
Sure. Thank you so much for providing some clarity there, Roberta. I'm gonna bring this back to the committee members to see what their thoughts are and whether there's any consensus. Is there a preference to come up with some figures, some numbers, with the understanding that we would we would certainly continue the conversation in next month's meeting, or is the preference to to take all of this information, mull it over, and then come back and have a fuller conversation next month when we meet again. So wanted to see if there are any thoughts, any preferences here.
I'm pretty comfortable with the allocation we've been using. And I don't, so I wouldn't have any problem with us suggesting we would continue with that for this coming year.
Thank you, David.
Yeah,
Any
in
other
general-
thoughts?
David.
In general, I would definitely agree with that. The only potential tweak that I would see would be going 15, 15, 15 between the open space and recreation, historic preservation, and flexible. I think the only benefit to showing it this way, in my mind, is to signal our priority, right? To signal our feelings about the goals of the committee. Otherwise, if we're going to move money from open space and recreation to fulfill requests for historic preservation down the line, it's not so meaningful. So I just see this as an embodiment of how we ourselves want to show our priorities. Otherwise, I would just say we'd go 15, 15, 15. But I can be convinced otherwise.
It's a compelling consideration. Wanted to see if committee members have any thoughts to Ryan's proposal.
So I think that, we can't move, once it goes into open space and recreation, we can't move it over to historic preservation. It's earmarked for that. What we can move is the stuff from the flexible fund, which is why I actually think it's a good, this model I feel like has been working, because it does try to bank that money for open space and recreation, while giving us the flexibility to address the historic preservation needs.
It's a good point. That's fair.
Certainly a good point, Heather. Any other thoughts from committee members?
I would just be a little hesitant to reduce the open space and recreation funding below 20%. I think the community input for open space shows that there is a high demand for it. And this year's shown that we are able to spend the full amount, and that was without asking for open space acquisition funds. So I think moving forward, we can kind of discuss what projects can consume a majority of that percentage, and then putting the remainder of it to open space and acquisition each year, to kind of ensure that our pockets are deep. So when acquisition comes up, we are prepared for it.
That's a point well taken, John.
I'm sort of of the same mindset there, where the 20% and the 15 sort of just shows people that we're reflecting the will, such as it is of the sample base that was giving us feedback. It seems, looking at the patterns, that the actual proportion is different from that, and that it seems like the flexible portion is tended to favor preservation, but that's worked on the other hand. So it's not like we've been locked in place with these 2015 and 10. So I think I'd probably lean slightly in the favor of keeping it the way it is also, although your point's well taken there, Ryan, about why you would want to do 15, 15, 15. But I think we're accomplishing the same thing this way, and it's kind of showing a breakdown that's closer to what the public seems to be interested in doing.
Totally fair. I can definitely live with that.
Yeah, and by the way, not to pile on, it actually is, I think it's good, because we have been doing the surveys each year, and it's really nice to be able to go to the table and say our funding reflects, the previous year's survey results, and we're surveying again, and if it changes, we can, that we're actually kind of, it's reflected in the allocation.
I think if anything, if anything, I would reduce the flexible fund to 5% and make open space 25 and go 25, 15, 55, 5. Just to more closely, push
I-
that goal. but we, you know, goes back to the ability to really grant it and award it and spend it.
Yeah. The conservation commissioner in me likes that idea, but I think more so I like the idea of the flexibility and us having the agility we're talking about in other ways, you know, because we get the same opportunity by having the 10% flexibility. You know, we just don't have it in, you know, locked in.
I guess I have
Right.
one
Sorry,
quick
please go ahead.
question. Thank you. So the flexible 10%, if would we be able to allocate some of that money to the open space acquisition fund from the flexible account, or does that have to specifically come from the open space and recreation line?
The purpose of the flexible account is that we can use it for any program area and any project within those program areas. So yes, you could use it for that.
Thank you.
Well, one question, I don't know that it totally influences how I would think about it, but how much of the historic preservation allocation is sort of is debt from say the central library, the West Branch Library and things like that?
That is a very good question, and I'm not sure I have the answer to that at my fingertips. But while you discuss, I can take a moment to find the actual budget from last year so that you can see how much is going to that.
Has that approach ever been taken with open space, or is that 20% fully available every year for new stuff?
The 20% is fully available for new stuff. On this slide are the projects that we've bonded in the past. So the 100 Homes program and Clarendon Hill have bonded, and the West Branch Library, but there have not been any bonded projects for open space up to date.
Okay.
There's your 20 million 1 acre parcel.
Perfect. Now time to find the seller.
That may be the hardest part of this juncture.
Indeed, it is.
Trying to do my math, the value of the city at how many acres are we? We're 4 square miles. 640
square
acres per square mile. That's 2,400 acres ish. Do we have a buyer for the city?
I'm afraid to consider who that be under the circumstances. So you know, while Roberta's looking through it, you know, for one thing I do want to say is I want to applaud, you know, both Ryan and Heather for sharing, you know, some other possibilities, because you know, even though I think there's compelling arguments around keeping the allocation percentages status quo, I do think that it's good to see, you know, alternate proposals, alternate ideas. So I definitely want to encourage everyone to come up with their thoughts around, you know, how we can apportion apportion the FY25 awarding consideration. Roberta, I think you have something up, the fall report, it looks like.
Yeah. So this shows that right now 130,000 is going toward debt service, which is about a quarter of the budget of last year's budget for historic resources.
Is that more like a third?
130,000 into 492. I didn't do the math. I just eyeballed it.
No, actually, no, you're right. I think it's more like it's closer to a quarter, somewhere in between.
Yeah.
I lost 100,000 on that for my transaction.
But I don't know if we might actually have a slightly smaller budget this coming year between the state match, and I think that the city's tax revenues have been leveling off after a period of growth. So we might see it's probably going to be around the same ballpark of what it looks like. And I don't think that this reflects the Clarendon Hill bond being drawn yet. So this is still just the 100 homes bond that's reflected in this figure.
Are those mostly 20-year bonds?
I think so, but I don't remember exactly.
It would be, yeah, this would be interesting to know how many more years of service we have on that debt.
That's something I don't think I've ever seen that presented to me, so I'd have to find out who could give me that number and deliver it to me, what the actual debt service schedule is. I've seen an estimated debt service schedule, but
Well,
not the
Well,
actual.
that'd probably be close enough for our,
Mhm.
for our use of just gonna know when, when those amounts are paid off, and then.
Yeah.
They're not the exact,
So
But we could probably get, when was the West Summer, was the West Somerville Library,
yeah,
the big one?
that
Right.
was the
So we could probably estimate, someone here probably knows when that project was likely bonded. But,
It was in the early years of the CPC. It was maybe like the second year of the committee or something. It was pretty early on.
They may not have drawn the bond. It was an FY16 project. So let's say it was approved probably in it was probably approved in 16.
Yeah.
And maybe the bond might have been drawn in 17.
And depending on how they allocate, what the bond was for, it might have been a
Yeah.
year or two later.
18.
If it was
Yeah.
really just if they only needed it for construction, for example.
Right. So 18, 19. So the bond is less than 5 years old.
Yeah, probably.
So what all that means, I don't really know. I don't know that makes me want to nudge the percentages anywhere. It just reminds me that we actually have a little bit less to toss around, at least in the preservation category.
Yeah.
But I don't know that would have me inclined to change the percentages or anything like that.
Right. So perhaps if I may make a proposal, if I would say that, Roberta, for now, if you don't mind keeping the percentages the same with the flexibility, and again, I want to give my fellow committee members to have some time to mull it over for our next meeting, should there be a compelling argument towards shifting the percentages or a discussion that should be had with the current percentages, or, as the baseline, or what we had discussed. I think that might be helpful because obviously this is a very important conversation, as well as a vote for us to be taking. So would that make sense to the members of the committee at this time? So that way we can kind of have something to work with, but then also have the opportunity to further discuss.
Okay.
Yeah, I have one other thought. Yes, I concur with that. And the other thing I was wondering about, though, is whether we would want to somehow stipulate or clarify that the flexible funding is for flexible allocations between historical preservation and open space, and maybe not make it open, so affordable housing gets their 50%, and then the other, the flexible 10% is, the intent is to move it between the other two. Now, I don't know, I get the feeling that's what we've been doing anyway, and I'm not sure, even as I say this, how much value there is on locking ourselves into that. But at least it gives it may kind of show, that's our intent.
Right. I think that makes sense. So in essence, you're thinking, David, affordable housing bucket and the I'll call it non-affordable housing bucket.
Kind of,
The
yes.
50-50 kind of, okay. Yeah. I mean, I think it's a reasonable enough consideration. Any thoughts from the from the members, committee members?
I don't know if it would complicate things when you have those hybrid preservation, affordable housing projects where we would find ourselves like, okay, we'll do I mean, we'll put the flexible fund on that project, but not on this one. Like, I just don't know if we're gonna.
So far, the hybrid projects that we've had, it's been easy enough to parse out which use it's going to. So we've, especially because they have to apply separately to the Affordable Housing Trust. So for example, the Just to Start project applied to the Affordable Housing Trust for the affordable housing portion of the CPA funding, and they applied to us for the historic preservation portion of that project. The 35 Richardson was the same. They applied to the Housing Trust for the housing portion and applied to us for the open space portion.
That's a
So we
good point,
treat
Heather.
it like a
Sorry,
different
please, Mary.
type of project, even though it's blended.
And arguably, even if it's a blended project, I would assume we'd want our proportion of the funding to stay to be consistent with the allocation that we've set. So they'd still have to show that, that the housing isn't taking too big, too much more of the chunk, or or unfortunately, or the open spaces taking too big a chunk, then we can, then we're allowed to allocate.
I think personally, your idea seems good, David, that about earmarking it between those two categories. And it seems it's sort of codifying what we do anyway. As long as Heather brought up, we're not kind of finding ourselves in a weird situation 2 years from now where we needed to not do that.
And I'd be curious whether this is really binding, or whether this is really, if we wanted to change it, I'm not sure that we couldn't just vote to allocate it a different way. It just seems more like guidance than, law.
Right. I agree with David on that. And Roberta, if we're for next month's meeting, if we're voting for this, I would presume it's for FY25, but not necessarily a precedent setting action that constrains us should future dynamics change and we're getting a lot more open space or housing, our historic preservation rather applications. Is that the case, or are we
That's
thinking about
correct.
this?
That's why the state enabling legislation requires the committee to plan annually. So not every community actually goes through this level of annual needs assessment, but this is spelled out in the legislation that you make an annual effort to evaluate what the community needs are. So they anticipate that you will make that decision year by year and not once and for always.
Thank you for clarifying. And Eric, just to bring this back, do you feel comfortable if that, with this clarification in mind, if we're just talking about FY25, would that make a difference for you and the way you look at this consideration?
I think it's fine to me. And so hypothetically, if next year we get one application for one of the categories or something woefully can we make a on the fly vote to just change our percentages in August or something? Or are we locked in?
Once we've appropriated the budget. So when you vote next month, it will be for the annual budget, which will put the funds into the reserves. And once you put the funds into the reserves, they can only be used for that purpose. So you can bank it for the next year. If you don't get any historic preservation projects next year, you will have 2 years worth of money to spend the following year.
But we can't vote to reallocate the money.
No, once it's gone into the reserve, it stays in that reserve.
That's a very helpful point. And again, that's why I would still recommend that we continue the conversation even into the next month's meeting, because of course we want to be thoughtful in making a decision and certainly voting for it, to ensure the allocations are those that we feel comfortable with. And so I think that makes a lot of sense. And Roberta, if you don't mind including in uh David's point regarding the flexible, the 10% flexible being split in that, I'm going to call it non-affordable housing areas. If you could keep that as part of the note or footnote, if you will,
Yeah.
for that would be helpful.
Can do that.
Thank you. Any other thoughts about the allocation?
Right.
So I'm just being mindful of the time as well. Roberta, if it's all right with you, maybe when it comes to the value statements, or the value considerations, we could perhaps bring this up in the next meeting, so that way we can have a robust discussion around there as well.
Yeah.
Great. So I think based on that, I think we can move on to the last agenda item, which is outreach subcommittee update. So Roberta has sent over an email with a list and some instructions for the subcommittee members. And Roberta, over to you if you don't mind sharing
Sure.
your thoughts.
Just very quickly, there isn't a lot to report because I'm very late bringing any material to you this month. Just before the meeting, I mailed out a contact list that I've been tidying up so that committee members can use that to do direct outreach to potential applicants. I just realized that there's a few more names that I haven't added to that list yet that were in the list that John shared with me. There were a few names that didn't overlap between our two lists. So I will go in and add those to that list. You have it and a shared version that we can all collaborate with online.
Roberta, I'm sorry, I just tried to go to it and it says I
Yeah.
need to request access.
Okay, so
Yeah.
I will, you know, that you got that as well. So
I
I'll take
did.
care of that.
Yeah.
I will make sure you all have access. And just to reiterate, the committee members who I shared the contact list with include Jahan, Heather, David, and Laura. So they're the subcommittee for doing direct outreach for a CPA. So I will leave that there are columns for you to take notes to give an indication if you've done outreach to any of these organizations. And if you got any bounce back or corrections to the emails, please make a note of that as well. And I will
Roberta.
leave it then. Yes.
I was just gonna say, so the access issue, sometimes it pops up because you're not signed into Google on the email that it was sent to. So sometimes just signing into your like Google Chrome under that email that it was sent to should give you that access.
No, I clicked on it from within my Google Chrome
Oh, okay.
address, so it's not a problem. I'm actually just sent Roberta the request, and I think that'll give her something easy to just click on and say yes.
Yeah.
And I've done the same, Roberta. Same
Okay.
request.
Great. I'll troubleshoot tomorrow and make sure that you all can see it.
That's great. And then Roberta, do you mind sharing how you prefer us to copy you in on when sending any emails related to the CPA? We just want to be mindful of both record keeping considerations, but
Yes.
also open, not to violate any open meeting laws either.
Yeah, so to avoid violating open meeting laws, we have a subcommittee which is fewer than the quorum for this committee. So we should keep it within the subcommittee, the direct outreach effort. And any emails that you send, just CC me or even blind copy me, just so that and that keeps a record of any emails that are sent on behalf of the committee that the city will have stored in their record storage.
Was there that generic CPC email address we were supposed to be using for that kind of
I
record
will,
archiving?
I will look that up. And it may have been that there was a generic email that the law department set up. I'll look into that. That was a year ago, so I'll follow up with those instructions for the subcommittee members.
And then should the subcommittee set a time to just sort of coalesce around what our approach is and how
So,
we're
so
gonna work?
So Heather, I would welcome that. The only point to consider, since I know you're a fellow subcommittee member and David is here as well, it's just timing. I think I would like to have a meeting scheduled where we could just meet and discuss how we're gonna approach the list as well as any other considerations. But if you can find the time and David as well, and I can check with Laura, and we can certainly get something going on the calendars respectively. And again, it would be a Zoom meeting. Maybe I could, if Roberta, if it's all right with you, or if you prefer to take this on, we could do like a poll of who's available when. Either way, I would welcome at least a preliminary conversation, and then in the future we could decide whether we want to continue to meet as a subcommittee or kind of report back to as one agenda item as part of the larger meeting. So if that makes sense, I'm certainly very much for it. And Roberta, would love to get your thoughts too, because I know you have some experience in this area as well.
No, I agree. It's probably best if I set up a Zoom meeting for all of you so that we just have a record of the meeting.
Sure, of course.
I think a Zoom meeting would probably suffice. I don't know that I need to take minutes for the subcommittee meeting if it's already going to be recorded. So I can send out a poll to find a meeting time for all of you and encourage you to take the lead as you like on this initiative.
That's great. And thank you for mentioning it, Heather.
And I also should mention that I will be working over the next week or two on developing a newsletter to go out to announce the final awards for this past year, as well as opening the funding round for FY25. The applications are now available. So once I've sent that out, you have some language that you can use in your outreach as well.
That would be terrific. And perhaps when the subcommittee meets, we can talk about standardizing language or at least providing consistent communications to I'm going to call them external parties, but they're organizations. We just want to make sure that we're fair and equitable as well in terms of the information that we're disseminating. So I think that's a really great point as well. Great. Are there any other thoughts about the outreach subcommittee? And I also welcome comments from members who are not part of the subcommittee. It's always welcome to hear from fellow committee members. Any other helpful tips, comments, thoughts that might help us with the outreach effort? So seeing none.
And they can share them. John, if anyone has any thoughts, they can share them with you, and you were
Sure.
right, and we're
Sure.
fine as far as open meeting.
We should be. I believe so.
I think that's fine. It doesn't have to just be here.
Right. Absolutely. And that's
they just can't email all of us, with their suggestions.
right. Exactly. I mean, if that's the case, then I think it might be helpful. And again, Roberta, I don't mean to put you on the spot with this, but it would be helpful if you received the comments, and then we could perhaps even discuss during the subcommittee meeting. At least the next one that we schedule, so that way, it's a more fuller discussion around which directions we can take. So absolutely, always encourage feedback, because there's always something helpful, useful that we could take back in and deploy it as part of our outreach efforts. So thank you for that, David. So I also wanted to see if if anyone has any comments, thoughts for the good of the meeting, anything that we may not have covered in the agenda that might be relevant or pertinent for the CPC to consider this evening.
This isn't a idea, but just to confirm, there's an event this Saturday, the civic thing.
Thank you for bringing that up. Yes, Civic Day is happening this Saturday. It is 12 to 4. And I believe, was it Heather said that you would be there for the 2 to 4 shift? So I don't have a confirmed person for the 12 to 2 shift yet. If anybody
Yeah, I
is,
can do that. I was on the fence before, but it looks like I'll be in town, so
oh, perfect.
I can do that. The only thing is I'm a novice with these events. Will the table be set up or do I need
Yes,
to?
the table will be set up. I'll be there. I'll be your partner. So we'll be doing it together. So I highly appreciate your being there. And that means that ensures that having 2 people at the table, one of us can take a break to get tacos if in fact they have another
Okay,
taco van waiting for us. Or whatever they decide to feed us with.
I'll just show up at noon and be there. I don't need to bring anything or.
Exactly.
And it's it's same place as last year in the
Um,
cafeteria or whatever, the main floor of the high school?
if the weather is nice, which I think it's supposed to be, I think it will be in the concourse outside.
Oh, okay.
So kind of, I think I'm envisioning that it will be spread out along the concourse.
Great. Thank you for bringing that up, Eric, and also for volunteering.
It was good. I would encourage folks, if you're around, just stop by just to see it. It was quite an event last year. I actually encouraged the Conservation Commission to table this year. And unfortunately, I missed the meeting last night when they were gonna discuss whether they're doing so or not. So I actually don't know the answer to that, but but I thought it was a mistake for us not to be represented last year.
Any other thoughts, comments for this evening's meeting? Seeing none, it looks like we have rounded out our agenda. Just want to thank everyone for their input and for some amazing conversation. I wanted to see if someone can make a motion to adjourn this meeting.
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
Thank you, Heather. Is there a second?
I'll second it.
Wonderful.
All right, thank you. I'll call the roll.
Sure, please.
Yeah. Jahan,
Yes.
Brian,
Yes.
John,
Yes.
Joe,
Yes.
Heather,
Yes.
Eric,
Yes.
and David.
Yes.
That's all of you present. Motion passes. Thank
Thank
you,
you so much.
everyone.
All right.
Take care.
Take care. See you next
Bye-bye.
month. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye.